5 years ago, David stood at the pinnacle of success. As a billionaire, he had everything one could desire: a sprawling mansion, a fleet of luxury cars, and a career that commanded respect and admiration. On the surface, his life was the epitome of perfection. But beneath the glittering exterior, David grappled with a growing sense of emptiness and disconnection. His marriage, once filled with love and laughter, had become strained under the relentless pressures of his high-stakes business ventures. The late nights at the office, the constant travel, and the unyielding demands of his empire left little room for the personal connections that once brought him joy. Enter Emma, a young, vibrant woman with a heart full of warmth and a spirit that could light up any room. When David decided to hire a nanny to care for his 2 precious children, he was searching for someone who could bring stability and affection into their lives. Emma was everything he had hoped for and more. Her nurturing nature and genuine kindness quickly won over not just the children, but also David's wife, who appreciated Emma's dedication and the positive influence she had on their family. At first, the relationship between David and Emma was strictly professional. They shared polite conversations about the children's progress, discussed household routines, and occasionally exchanged friendly banter. However, as weeks turned into months, an unspoken tension began to build between them. David found himself looking forward to Emma's presence in the house, feeling a sense of comfort and ease that he hadn't experienced in years. Emma, too, seemed to relish the time she spent with David, her laughter becoming a cherished sound in the otherwise silent evenings of the mansion. It started innocently enough: shared jokes, lingering glances, and the occasional touch that seemed accidental but carried an undeniable charge. David couldn't quite understand why he was feeling this way. Was it the loneliness that came with his immense wealth and success? Or perhaps the subtle charm that Emma exuded effortlessly? Regardless of the reason, the connection between them was undeniable, and it began to blur the lines between employer and employee. As the months passed, their interactions grew more intimate. Late-night conversations that were once about mundane household matters evolved into deep, meaningful discussions about their hopes, dreams, and fears. David found himself opening up to Emma in ways he never had with anyone else, sharing aspects of his life that he had long kept hidden even from his closest friends. Emma, in turn, revealed her own vulnerabilities, creating a bond that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. The mansion, once a sanctuary of wealth and privilege, became the backdrop for their secretive meetings. Every stolen moment together was filled with a mix of passion and anxiety. David was acutely aware of the risk he was taking, the potential fallout if anyone were to discover the depth of his feelings for Emma. His wife, oblivious to the growing tension, continued to trust Emma implicitly, never suspecting the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. David's internal conflict was intense. On one hand, he was torn by loyalty to his wife and the life they had built together. On the other hand, the connection with Emma ignited a passion that he couldn't ignore. He questioned himself relentlessly. Was this love or merely a fleeting distraction from the pressures of his life? Could he continue to juggle the demands of his empire while nurturing this forbidden relationship? Emma, too, was struggling with her own emotions. She had entered David's home with the intention of providing care and support, never anticipating that her role would evolve into something so profoundly personal. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on her. She respected David's marriage and felt guilty for the emotional entanglement that was developing between them. Yet, denying her feelings seemed impossible, as each interaction only deepened the bond they shared. The secrecy of their affair added another layer of complexity to the situation. Every interaction had to be carefully orchestrated to avoid suspicion. They communicated through hushed conversations in the dimly lit hallways, exchanged messages late at night, and found excuses to spend time alone together under the guise of discussing the children's needs. The constant fear of being discovered created a tension that was both thrilling and exhausting. As the months turned into years, the emotional strain became increasingly unbearable for David. The facade of a happy family life was cracking, and the deception was taking a toll on his mental and emotional well-being. He began to withdraw from his wife, unable to bridge the growing emotional gap between them. The children, sensing the tension, became more withdrawn, adding to David's sense of guilt and responsibility. Emma, too, was feeling the weight of their secret. She loved David, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. The thought of being the reason for the crumbling of a seemingly perfect family haunted her dreams. She grappled with the reality that their love, no matter how passionate, was causing irreparable damage to the lives around them. The turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, while David was away on a business trip, Emma received a message that would change everything. A casual conversation with a friend led to the accidental revelation of her secret relationship with David. Panic set in as she realized the precariousness of their situation. How long could they keep this hidden? What would happen if the truth came out? Meanwhile, David's own insecurities and fears grew. The constant juggling act was draining him, and the emotional toll was becoming too great to ignore. He knew that continuing down this path would only lead to more pain and heartbreak for everyone involved. Yet, the thought of letting go of Emma was equally unbearable, as she had become an integral part of his life. The dual pressures of maintaining the facade and dealing with their internal conflicts created a perfect storm of emotional turmoil. David was caught in a relentless battle between his duties as a husband and father and his undeniable feelings for Emma. The stress was manifesting in sleepless nights, strained conversations, and a pervasive sense of dread that something was bound to give. As the days dragged on, the inevitability of their situation became clearer. The longer they tried to hide their relationship, the more complicated and painful it became. The secrecy was eating away at them, leaving scars that threatened to tear their lives apart. David knew that sooner or later the truth would surface, and he couldn't foresee how the fallout would impact his family, his marriage, and his own sense of self. In this tangled web of love, loyalty, and deception, David and Emma found themselves at a crossroads. The choices they made in the coming months would determine not only their own futures but also the lives of those they loved most. The emotional roller coaster they were on was both exhilarating and terrifying, leaving them to wonder if the love they had found was worth the inevitable heartbreak it would bring. This expanded section delves deeper into the emotional complexities and internal struggles of both David and Emma, providing a more comprehensive and engaging narrative that captures the intensity and realism of their situation. David's life wasn't always defined by excess and affluence. Before the wealth, the sprawling estate, and the constant spotlight, he was just a man with big dreams and an insatiable drive to succeed. His wife, Catherine, had been his rock through it all. They met during their college years when life was simple and their love felt invincible. Catherine was his partner in every sense of the word. His confidant, his cheerleader, and the one who stood by him when his business ventures faltered in the early days. Together, they dreamed of a life filled with love, family, and stability. But success came with its own price. As David's business empire grew, so did the distance between him and Catherine. Late-night dinners turned into solitary meals, vacations became solo business trips, and their shared laughter was replaced by silence. Catherine was consumed with running their home and raising their 2 children, while David was trapped in the endless cycle of meetings, contracts, and deadlines. They were 2 people living parallel lives under the same roof, and neither wanted to admit how far they had drifted apart. It was during one of those particularly busy periods that Emma entered their lives. She came highly recommended, her credentials impeccable, her demeanor warm, and her smile disarming. From the moment she walked into their home, she brought a sense of lightness that had been missing for so long. The children adored her, clinging to her like a beacon of joy. Even Catherine, who had grown wary of trusting outsiders, felt an instant connection with Emma. For David, however, it was different. At first, he saw Emma as just another employee, albeit one who performed her duties with an admirable level of care and dedication. But as time went on, she became more than that. It wasn't just her youthful beauty that caught his attention. It was her energy, her laughter, the way she seemed to breathe life into every interaction. Unlike the strained conversations he had with Catherine, speaking with Emma felt easy, even exciting. Emma, on the other hand, wasn't blind to David's growing interest in her. She noticed the way his gaze lingered a little too long during their conversations, how he sought her out more frequently, and how he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. It was flattering, sure, but it was also confusing. Emma wasn't the type to overstep boundaries, and she respected the sanctity of the family she worked for. Yet, the more time she spent with David, the harder it became to ignore the chemistry between them. Their connection deepened over time. It wasn't deliberate, at least not at first. They found themselves drawn to quiet corners of the house for longer conversations. They shared personal stories, revealing sides of themselves they hadn't shown anyone else. Emma spoke of her struggles growing up, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and the heartbreak that led her to take this job. David, in turn, shared his fears of failing as a father, his loneliness despite his success, and his longing for the simplicity of his younger years. Each conversation blurred the line between employer and employee further. There were moments when their hands accidentally brushed, sending electric sparks through the air. Times when David caught himself watching her as she played with his children, marveling at how effortlessly she brought joy into their lives. And then there were the late nights when he'd find her reading in the living room, her hair falling softly around her face, and he'd feel an ache he couldn't explain. Emma was torn. She knew she should keep her distance, that any emotional entanglement with David would spell disaster. But how could she, when he made her feel seen in a way no one ever had? His compliments felt genuine, his laughter infectious, and his presence comforting. She couldn't help but wonder if their connection was meant to be, even though every fiber of her being screamed otherwise. For David, the guilt was unbearable. He loved Catherine, at least he thought he did. But their love felt like a distant memory, a faded photograph of happier times. With Emma, everything felt alive, real, and intoxicatingly new. He knew it was wrong to harbor these feelings, let alone act on them. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to stop. Catherine, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in her own home. She was preoccupied with the daily grind of motherhood, the endless tasks that came with managing a household, and the occasional charity events that kept her socially active. To her, Emma was a blessing, a reliable figure who made her life a little easier. The idea that there could be something more between Emma and David never crossed her mind. As the months turned into years, the emotional tension became almost unbearable. Their interactions grew riskier. David began finding excuses to be home more often, ostensibly to spend time with his children but really to steal moments with Emma. Emma, in turn, began dressing a little differently, nothing overt, but enough for David to notice. They exchanged text messages late at night, their words laced with hidden meanings and unspoken desires. Every step they took deeper into their emotional entanglement brought them closer to a breaking point. David couldn't shake the feeling that he was living a double life. At work, he was the confident, accomplished businessman. At home, he was a husband and father trying to maintain the facade of a perfect family. But with Emma, he was just a man, a vulnerable, conflicted man searching for something he couldn't quite name. Emma was equally conflicted. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, that her actions could destroy the very family she had come to care for. But love, or whatever this was, wasn't something she could control. She found herself longing for David's attention, her heart racing whenever he was near, her thoughts consumed by the possibility of what they could be. Their relationship was a ticking time bomb, and they both knew it. But the question lingered. How long could they keep this up before it all came crashing down? The house was unusually quiet that evening. The children were asleep, their soft breathing echoing down the halls, and Catherine sat in the living room, sipping her tea. Her phone buzzed on the table, a notification from David's workgroup chat. She glanced at it absent-mindedly, but something caught her eye. A name appeared that didn't belong. Emma. Her heart skipped a beat, though she told herself not to overreact. It could be nothing, couldn't it? Curiosity gave way to a growing unease, and Catherine hesitated, her hand trembling as she unlocked David's phone. Her heart raced as she scrolled through his messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Work discussions, updates on the kids, reminders to pick up groceries. But then, tucked between mundane texts, she found it. A string of messages between David and Emma. Her breath caught in her throat. The words weren't explicit, but their meaning was unmistakable. "You looked beautiful today. I can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" Catherine's world shattered in that moment. The weight of betrayal hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her gasping for air. She read through the thread, her hands trembling, tears streaming down her face. Every message was a dagger to her heart. How could this be happening? How could the man she'd loved, the man she'd built a life with, betray her so completely? She didn't know how long she sat there, frozen in shock, before the sound of footsteps pulled her back to reality. David entered the room. His tie loosened and his expression weary from another long day at work. But the moment he saw Catherine holding his phone, her tear-streaked face twisted in anguish, he froze. "David," she said, her voice cracking, "what is this? What have you done?" He didn't need to ask. He knew. The color drained from his face as he stared at her. His mind racing for an explanation, an excuse, anything to undo the moment. "Catherine, he began, but she cut him off with a sharp, furious glare. "Don't you dare lie to me," she snapped, her voice rising with every word. How long have you been doing this behind my back? With her? In our home?" David struggled to find the words, his mouth opening and closing as guilt and shame consumed him. "It's not what you think," he stammered, but even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. "Not what I think," Catherine cried, her voice breaking. "Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I'm stupid? You've been sneaking around with her for God knows how long, and you expect me to believe it's nothing?" David stepped closer, his hands raised in a desperate attempt to calm her. "Catherine, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" she shouted, throwing his phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack, the sound reverberating through the silence. "Explain how you've destroyed everything we built. How you've made a fool out of me. Out of us." The raw pain in her voice was unbearable, and David felt like the lowest man alive. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." Catherine laughed bitterly, the sound filled with anger and despair. "You never wanted to hurt me. Then why did you do it, David? Why her? Was I not enough for you? Were the vows we took meaningless?" David ran a hand through his hair, his chest heaving with emotion. "It wasn't about you, Catherine," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "I was lost, felt empty. Emma made me feel alive again. But it doesn't mean I don't love you." "Love me?" Catherine spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't betray someone you love, David. You don't destroy your family for some fleeting thrill." The confrontation escalated, emotions running high as years of buried resentment and unspoken truths spilled out. Catherine accused him of neglecting their marriage, of prioritizing his work over their family. David defended himself, admitting his failures but insisting that the affair wasn't a reflection of his love for her. The more they argued, the more the chasm between them grew. Amid the chaos, a quiet voice interrupted them. "Mom, Dad." Their youngest child stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from their eyes, confusion etched across their face. "Why are you yelling?" Catherine's heart broke anew as she looked at her child, realizing the ripple effect of David's betrayal. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Go back to bed. We'll talk in the morning." The child hesitated before nodding and shuffling back to their room. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine turned back to David, her expression hardened. "I want her out of this house. Tonight." David nodded, too ashamed to argue. He found Emma in the guest house where she'd been staying, and told her it was over. Her face crumpled in pain, but she didn't fight him. She packed her belongings in silence, tears streaming down her face, knowing that her time in their lives was over. When Emma left, Catherine locked herself in their bedroom, refusing to look at David. He sat alone in the living room, staring at the shattered remnants of their life together, wondering how he'd ever allowed things to reach this point. The fallout was far from over, but in that moment David knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. In the end, David's choices unraveled everything he once held dear. His betrayal shattered the trust of the woman who had stood by his side through thick and thin. Emma, the nanny who had brought him fleeting happiness, was left to pick up the pieces of her own broken heart. And Catherine, blindsided by a love she thought unbreakable, faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life. What was once a story of wealth and comfort became a cautionary tale of deception and loss. Was it worth it? David would spend the rest of his life grappling with that question.